Chapter 3. The Glaher Byrer Clayer, Training Fleet Commander-in-Chief. Avrielsek née Duberskreber Perian Lamher regarded herself as a power player in the chess game of history. With regard to the Empire's fate, she ascribed to neither the optimistic nor the pessimistic views. She had no interest in trying to predict the future, for she must blaze a bright future with her own two hands, and she now had the power to do so. The position of Crown Princess was nothing to sneeze at within the Empire, and to call the Empire the lead player of the age was no exaggeration. In addition to being the Crown Princess, she held the military rank of Imperial Admiral and had been entrusted with the duties of the Training Fleet Commander-in-Chief as well. The Training Fleet was, at present, the largest force in the humankind empire of Av's star forces. Back when the sun named Avriel shone at the Empire Center, the Training Fleet was a collection of newly constructed ships. It was a fleet where crews practiced how to handle the new ships they were put in charge of. The ships born in construction sites would come under the Training Fleet before proceeding to their eventual posts. Nevertheless, the 28th Emperor, Du Sanyu, who acceded to the throne on the heels of the fall of the capital, expanded the Training Fleet's role. He tasked them with the role of the Starpilot Academies that educated Star Forces management. The residential sections of the Starpilot Academies were furnished with motive power and space-time bubble generators since before they left Lokvakar, which was to say they were actively used as interstellar ships during the Great Emergency, as the trainee pupils were the first ones who had to unfortunately be evacuated when the fall of the capital was at hand. Bioer Kosna Clayer, Training Fleet 1, was formed around the mobile residential quarters for trainees. Since the lectures held at the academy had to be conducted aboard ship and the number of trainees increased, passenger ships were added. However, there was no time or resources to manufacture new passenger ships, and so they were created via modifying older model battle line and supply ships. The original mobile residential quarters were also armed for self-defense. Residential ships weren't the only ones that belonged to Fleet 1. Warships were also needed for training exercises, and the force of arms required to guard and escort was even more important. The future Star Forces star pilots in Training Fleet 1 were the hope of the Empire, which could not afford to lose them. Therefore, though the Fleet 1 escort corps was small, it was of a high caliber. They could be safely called the most elite corps the Imperial Star Forces could reasonably expect at present. Fleet 1's scope and role were in the process of expanding. Right after it was founded, only trainees and teaching staff had lived in Fleet 1's residential quarters, but nowadays, kids awaiting their enrollment were also embarked. Moreover, enrollment was initially reserved for boys and girls in the offing, but the age limit was gradually decreased, until even toddlers were allowed to be aboard, though of course not without guardianship. Owing to that, the fleet was referred to by another name among the gossipy, the Bioer Sodmarer Nursery Fleet. When Lafier first learned of that, she was depressed. Am I some kind of nursery school principal? Of course, she never took command of Fleet 1 directly. That was Star Forces Admiral Sheikh Batramser Aturkhan, the Laseret Gamub, Duchess of Gamub. Though she didn't have very much experience on the front lines, she had exhibited her acumen fighting at the rear for many years, and she was a skilled soldier with great personal magnetism. The position of Training Fleet 1 Commander-in-Chief was probably too major for the still young Lafier. Star Forces Admiral Sheikh was under the command of the Training Fleet Commander-in-Chief, but that was mostly pro forma. Lafier's job was to receive reports and to field the requests that occasionally came her way. Fleet 2 was the fleet that inherited the mission the Training Fleet had before the fall of the capital. It managed newly constructed ships before they got assigned to other corps. The Glagum Byrer Clayer, Training Fleet Command, was once located in the Imperial Palace in Lokvakar. Back then, all of the construction sites that manufactured vessels of war revolved around the son of Avriel, just like the Imperial Palace. This made it convenient for receiving new ships. However, now that the Avriel Count Dom had fallen into enemy hands, the construction sites had been redeployed to the territories that were still left to the Empire. For example, one of the 5 great construction sites, the Better Site, was now in a star system called the Zobair Rimzezer, Rimzezek Harbor, along with Glagum Byrer Mada Clayer, Training Fleet 2 Command. Each of the other star systems that housed construction sites also housed Glagam Fika Byramata, Fleet 2's secondary command centers. It was Fleet 2's role to manage and defend these construction sites, which was another duty that did not used to be laid upon the Training Fleet. Just as Training Fleet 1 was called the Nursery Fleet, Fleet 2 was nicknamed the Bio-Lock or Construction Fleet. Fleet 1 fostered people, while Fleet 2 produced the ships. Fleet 2's commander-in-chief was not a flight branch star pilot, but Spanu Fazar, engineering admiral, and Imperial Baron Smitek Borgjar Sash. He was the only Landworlder commander-in-chief in all of the star forces. The new ships that completed their drills in Fleet 2 were sent to Bio-Urbina Clayer, Training Fleet 3, and then inducted into their corps. It was here they trained in exercises at the squadron and subfleet formation scales and higher, preparing for actual service in so doing. After completing a series of training exercises, most corps were prepared to fly into combat at any time. Just as the Training Fleet was the largest corps in the Star Forces, Training Fleet 3 could be called the largest operational battle corps in the Star Forces. It was commanded directly by the Training Fleet Commander-in-Chief, which is to say, by Lafier. Lafier oftentimes found herself thinking, maybe this fleet exists to train me. She did think of herself as a pretty excellent star pilot, but she knew that had it been peacetime, there was no way she'd be anywhere near the rank of Imperial Admiral. She'd probably be a Hecto Commander at best. During wartime, promotion tracks were sped up for everyone, not just Imperials, but even so, by all rights she should be at the Associate Commodore level at the highest, which would give her a subfleet to command. Had it not been for the extraordinary predicament presented by the fall of the capital, Lafier would not be commanding such a giant fleet. That notwithstanding, she was still the Crown Princess, the next Empress. Of course, that status was provisional in nature. The Countdom of Avriel, where the imperial capital of Lokfakar was located, also bore the role of joining the 8 monarchies of the empire. The 8 portals in that star system each led to a different region via planar space. Now that the Avriel Countdom was lost, the star forces could not make use of those 8 portals, and the empire became divided. The 4 monarchies under the emperor's dominion were Razius, Barca, Wesco, and Syaorgidi. The remaining 4 monarchies, Skir, Alish, Bargzada, and Kryeb, could not be reached or contacted. They were collectively named the Dakirik Freibearer Badrapika, half of the empire to recover. The half that the emperor did reign over was simply called the Dakirik Freibearer, Empire half. It was hoped these 4 unreachable monarchies also had surviving Imperials, including Lafier's father, Dubius the King of Kryeb. Imperials in her age group, such as her little brother Duir, were probably still there as well. There could be no doubt they were being tempered by even thornier circumstances. If the empire's state of segmentation was resolved and Imperials worthier of being the crown heir appeared, Lafier would have to yield her position. Barring some scandal, she would not be stripped of her Imperial Admiral rank, but she would still be given a post that was more fit for a Commodore or Grand Commodore. There was another possibility as well. Lafier was currently at the age where she was supposed to compete to be named crown heir. And though she was currently at the forefront, that didn't mean she'd actually gotten there yet. If someone else who was worthy to be the next emperor appeared in her age group, or even in the generation after her, then Lafier would naturally fight as a soldier under the new crown heir. If that did come to pass, though it would shame her immensely, she would understand. Preserving the empire was an uncertain prospect at the best of times. The empire could not persist while led by an incompetent emperor. Compared to the empire, her personal self-esteem was utterly worthless, whether she was an Avriel or not. In short, Lafier basically needed to perform admirably enough to be seen as worthy of the Jade Throne. At the very least, she could safeguard her pride. And she rather hoped she could preserve the empire in the doing. She'd hate for her name to go down in history as the last emperor of the humankind empire of Av. In an office in the Glagak Byra training fleet flagship, Klibnikek, Lafier shut herself in alone, doing her work while riding that meandering train of thought. Commander-in-Chief, came a reproachful voice. It was her adjutant, Lean Cyan Roke Jeant, the Count of Hyde. The quartermaster Kilo commander's head was peering from a virtual window screen. "What?" asked Lafier. "If I could receive your approval, I would be most pleased, Glaher." The phrasing was polite, but his tone was dripping with irritation. "I'm working on it." But then she realized she had been rather absorbed in her thoughts. "Is that so?" Doubt tinged his eyes. "Because it looks to me as though the workflow has hit a pause." "I'm thinking. Are you saying I don't have the right to say no? Are you telling me to approve of everything without reading?" "Oh no, not at all. Now that I have once again been made aware of how earnestly you are undertaking this, I reflect upon the joys of serving as your adjutant." A smile curved Jin's lips. Then he quietly added, "I've got a lot on my plate, so please, Lafier, get it done quick." "Shut up, Jint." There was no need for concern that this conversation would be listened in on. This back and forth was theirs alone. "I'll zip it, but only if you do that work for me." From where Jint was, he wasn't actually able to see Lafier, but he knew how work was progressing, and so he must have concluded she was slacking off. Jint's adjutant position involved serving as an aide to the commander-in-chief's general affairs. He was, in so many words, her private secretary. His most important duty was managing her daily agenda. Of course, her own will counted more than anything when it came to how the commander-in-chief would spend her time, and the chief of staff's requests were the next most important. Her adjutant merely managed what time she had left over. That being said, the majority of commanders-in-chief did mostly as their aides decided, barring some state of emergency, and Lafier was no exception. Initially, after assuming her post, she would, in her enthusiasm, make plans, but before long she quit doing so. As of late, Lafier's mornings started with her approving of the schedule Jint prepared for her. Then she would complete the items on that list, be notified of what time she had to get up the next day, and tuck herself in. Her wake-up time was usually set for 8 o'clock by ship's time, but sometimes it changed due to her schedule having been too full, among other reasons. At times, she felt like a kitten getting carried in its mother's mouth by the scruff. And the mama cat carrying her was, of course, Jint. Mama cat was always pestering her that it was time to move to this place or that place. Alas, an actual kitten could just curl up to sleep once it was plopped somewhere. Unfortunately for Lafier, she always had things to carry out wherever she found herself. Lafier scanned the text displaying on the virtual window screen. The document was asking her permission for the transfer of supplies and the concomitant budget implementation. According to Jint's annotations, this matter wasn't a problem, and it was of little importance. Lafier trusted Jint as her adjutant. If he said it wasn't a problem, then it wasn't. Naturally, her sense of responsibility compelled her to read everything. Yet, as might be expected, she found nothing she really needed to deliberate over. "Approved," nodded Lafier. Right at that moment, her body was scanned so as to confirm it was the training fleet commander-in-chief sitting there. Then she drew her personal hand stamp in the air with her finger, and that too was scanned. Through that twin-step authentication, the CompuCrystals verified it was truly the commander-in-chief who'd given her sanction. Then the information was relayed to the related departments through the CompuCrystal network. It was the hand stamp's fault the Glaherer was forced to perform her duties by her lonesome. There were two types of hand stamp, the type that was written on a flat surface and the type that was drawn into the air. The flat surface type was public knowledge, and the higher the signatory status, the more famous their hand stamp. Yet the chance to use flat surface hand stamps seldom came up in everyday life. They were formal in nature and not practical. It was the air drawing type that was used on an everyday basis, and they were not to be revealed to strangers. Even parents and children had to conceal their hand stamps from each other. They were CompuCrystal recorded under multiple layers of protection, and the CompuCrystals referred to that recording when necessary. That was why officials of high rank were asked to do this work where no one could see them. However, just because a close eye was being kept on the flow of work didn't put her at ease. In fact, it was more stressful than not. It felt like her spirit was getting whittled away, bit by bit. When she was about to deal with yet another item on her agenda, a light turned on. Somebody besides Jint wanted to speak with her. There were only a select number of people who could talk to her while she was working without going through Jint first, of course, and that number was 1. This could only be the chief of staff. Lefier accepted the call, and a window screen opened. "Glaherer," said Chief of Staff Commodore Sawbash through the window. "We will be at the Sod Udor, Udok portal, shortly. Could you come to the bridge?" "I'm coming," she replied without pause. Another window screen. It was Jint again. Lefier felt low-key annoyed. Jint hadn't done the call-waiting request first. Not that her adjutant technically needed to, but it was still a bit rude, wasn't it? "I will call you 1 minute before we are scheduled to pass through," he said. It wasn't clear whether he'd picked up on her irritation. What Mama Cat was really saying was, "You can stay there and keep working in the meantime." "No, I'm coming now," she insisted. "Then the rest of the agenda items will be left for later." "Make it so." Lefier found herself nodding. "I believe you will need to allot time for sleep, but I know that. Incidentally, Glaherer, your personal time today currently stands at 7 hours, 47 minutes, stated Jint. "If you figure sleep time into that, then of course that chips it down even more." "According to the estimations in that case," Lefier interrupted, "you had best refrain from taking any more of my sleep time with your pointless blather." "Apologies, ma'am." "Never mind that. I'd like to prepare for when we're in 3 space. The preparations are in order." She could practically read Jint's mind. "What, you don't trust me, Lefier?" She was sure that if Sawbash weren't present, he'd outright say it. "It's just for caution's sake." "I understand." The lights turned on, and the door opened. Right outside the door lay the commander's bridge. "Fee Glaherer," said the guard NCC, announcing Lefier's arrival. The staff officers at the bridge stood up and saluted. Lefier saluted back. Only one person there remained seated, a woman. But it wasn't solely the fact that she alone was sitting while the crown princess was standing that made her stand out. She wasn't wearing a military uniform either. After returning the bridge's salute, Lefier walked up to her and bowed her head. "Your Eminence." The woman had an exquisite circlet over her verdigris-colored hair, and pointy Avriel ears poked out from said hair. She was the Faniga Glagum or Byrer Clayer, Abdicant Empress of Training Fleet Command, and the Larthuesker, Queen of Wesco, Avrielsek ne Dwer Lamlin. Her presence was one of the reasons Lefier felt like she was still doing on-the-job training. In the past, the idea of an abdicant emperor or empress traveling together with a fleet was unheard of. It would be one thing if she were just hitching a ride. She was given a seat in the command center and everything. This was yet another sign the Empire was in an unusual position. Both Lamlin and the man who assigned her to Training Fleet Command, Emperor Dusanyu, were Avriels, natural-born soldiers, just like their ancestors before them. They understood the folly of appointing 2 Glaherer to a fleet. Consequently, the Faniga Glagum, command abdicant, didn't intrude when it came to minutiae. That said, she was always examining everything. She could freely peruse the fleet's most classified documents. And if she ever found something the young Glaherer did to reach excessive levels of foolishness, she would exercise her authority to revoke the right of command from Lefier and confer it to someone more fitting. One could only imagine Lamlin would find herself to be the top candidate for acting in the commander-in-chief's stead. "Thank you for having me here, Fee." Lamlin bowed her head slightly. Lamlin never voiced anything close to critical of Lefier's actions, but she possessed the special ability to convey her appraisal of Lefier by the way she pronounced the word "fee." What others thought of Lefier didn't much concern her, but it was a different story when it came to how an abdicant thought of her. She very much cared whether her performance could win her the favor of the archelders of the Avriel clan. Now that there were so few Imperials around compared to before, her obligation to aim for the emperorship was more serious than ever. It appeared that the abdicant's appraisal of the crown princess today was neutral. Lefier was relieved for the time being, and she took the commander's seat. 537 seconds until frontmost ship passes through the Udok portal, reported the navigation staff officer, Vice Hecto Commander Nombak. Nombaka's rank was relatively high, but not long had passed since he took up his staff officer post. In reality, he was learning the ropes of being a staff officer, but he had gained a great deal of trust fighting under Lefier since his Liewing Star pilot days, or so Nombak liked to believe. Lefier wasn't of any mind to deny Nombak his pride. She was thankful she had the young comrade-in-arms by her side. "Okay," Lefier nodded. It was quiet. There wasn't much that could be done in Fleet Command during that point in time. The order the ships would plunge through the portal was predetermined and relayed to all the ships under her beforehand. Yet the air in the command center was so tense it could be cut with a knife. Beyond the Udok portal, in the Limskor Udor, lay the Imperial seat ship Goftnosh. That was where Leifir was scheduled to be granted an audience with Emperor Dusanu. Leifir pulled up a bunch of documents in the space in front of her seat. It was Jint who compiled those files, and Jint was standing beside her. Jint must not have been at the bridge for very long. Her adjutant was permanently stationed in a room that led to the commander's bridge to make it convenient for him to receive visitors and callers. It was also his job to prevent ruffians from invading the commander's bridge. Of course, an incident like that had most recently happened 370 years ago, so no one was seriously concerned about that. If Leifir had really spared security any thought, she would have chosen someone else to be her adjutant. It was difficult to imagine Jint could hold back a posse of hoodlums after all. The documents before her eyes contained everything she needed to know for the occasion. None of it was news to her, though. It was simply written down in case she forgot something. Also enumerated were the things she should report to the throne during her audience. They were originally chosen via her own directions, so there was no need to re-examine them. Besides, the whole conversing through an official audience thing was ceremonial. Even if Leifir did forget to mention something, that information would get transmitted to Central regardless. The reason the Emperor and Crown Princess ever brought something up was to let the other party know it was important. One was justified in calling it silly, but in the Empire, even these kinds of things were differentiated by ranking order. The Ov liked the chaos and uncertainty that the diversity of land worlds sparked. In the past, there were frequent calls to homogenize the various worlds under Empire control, but that was commonly seen as a truly eccentric opinion. It was at times even deemed ghoulish. Yet at the same time, the opinion that a robust social order was necessary to bring together these chaotic worlds prevailed, and those that doubted that were a rarity. That was especially so during such strange times as these. It was considered absolutely necessary to rank people, organizations, and all manner of things for the purpose of establishing an orderly system. Leifir had never doubted the need for order. However, it was also a fact that it felt quite rigid in recent years. Each time she climbed a long flight of stairs, she felt as though the stairs grew narrower and the flights took her a shorter amount of the way to the ceiling. Ignoring her adjutant's counsel to work in her office and doing some other work on the bridge was the extent of how much she could buck the system. And even then, she would have to sacrifice her sleep time in exchange. This was the time she'd obtained for herself through her little rebellion. She scanned the documents in order to apply that time effectively, but she didn't find anything that gave her pause. Jint was as excellent an adjutant as ever. 10 seconds before the frontmost ship passes through the Udok portal, reported Nombok. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, passing through. The patrol ship at the front of the pack, the Mwako, rushed into the portal alongside a conveyance ship. A few seconds later, the conveyance ship alone returned to planar space. Safety confirmed, stated Nombok. I will instruct the ship commander of the Klibnikek to pass through the Udok portal. The fleet's actions were left up to the navigation staff officers when all was clear, so the Glaherer didn't meddle. The bridge personnel didn't ask for Leifir's permission or orders. They simply went about their work without fuss. This just in from the Klibnikek bridge. Time passing through Udok portal estimated at 14 hours 21 minutes and 43 seconds by ship's time. They had about 5 minutes to go. The Klibnikek was categorized as a patrol ship, but it lacked a patrol ship's claws and fangs, the EM cannons and mobile space-time mines. The space normally occupied by those weapons was instead used for fleet command and dwellings for its personnel. Of course, Leifir also had a residence aboard ship. In advance of the Klibnikek crossing into 3 space, 2 patrol ships rushed into the Udok portal. Leifir switched modes for her Frokras. Now information was flowing from the Klibnikek's detectors straight into her Frosh, informing her of the state of affairs in the ship's vicinity. Passing through the Udok portal in 10, said Nombok. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, passing through as scheduled. The inner surface of the compressed bubble that she saw through her frocross popped, and in an instant, she was perceiving the Limskor Udor. An immaterial, phosphorescent sphere, the Udok portal was orbiting a giant gas planet. The Borekth Udor, Udok Viscount's manor, was on the same orbit. Around the star named Udok, there were several antimatter fuel factories set up by the Borekth, the Skometal house. However, the facilities of the Borekth didn't really stand out. A huge fleet was moored over the gas planet, and it would be a tall order to find the Borekth without conducting a space probe. Even around the star, the factories of the Viscometal house were buried inside a mobile antimatter fuel factory brought in from the outside. The commander's bridge grew increasingly hectic. The fleet emerged one ship after the other into 3 space. Portals appeared as swirls in planar space and as spheres in 3 space. There could be no foreknowledge as to where on that sphere or line, after passing through a portal, one would appear. This was not a fault of the technology, but rather an uncertainty principle imposed by the cosmos. Therefore, fleets that entered a portal in ordered formations could not help but be in disarray upon crossing over. Fleet Command was tasked with the important mission of reorganizing the ships into tight formations. As this happened without fail every time, it was now unlikely that a collision or other unsightly accident would occur, but even so, small issues cropped up here and there. And it was important not to forget that what Leifir commanded was a training fleet. Commanders of all levels and their staff officers were struggling strenuously every day to become proficient at the things they needed to carry out. The navigation officers and their subordinates would be overwhelmed by the complex work ahead of them for a while. Glaherer, said the communications staff officer, an information link has been established with the Rubia Koka, Mobile Imperial Palace. The time lag is 2.4 seconds. I'd like to inform His Majesty of our arrival myself. Is it possible? Asked Leifir. Yes, ma'am. It appears His Majesty is already waiting. Oh ho. Lamlina's voice was a bit too loud to be taken as muttering. His Majesty must have quite some time on his hands. I'm green with envy. Everyone at the bridge pretended not to hear this remark. Leifir stood up and gazed at the main screen. Now then, I will offer up words of greeting. Just a moment, ma'am, said the communications officer. He will grace us shortly. The 28th Emperor appeared on the main screen. Irremitten, Your Majesty. Leifir bowed deeply. The Viscountess of Parian Leifir and the Training Fleet 3 currently under her command humbly call upon Your Majesty. Dusanyu wasn't able to see anyone but Leifir, both the staff officers busy settling fleet affairs and Lamlin, who was smiling enigmatically in a corner of the bridge, were hidden from his view. We're pleased to see you are all well, Fi said Dusanyu, keeping it simple. Your Majesty, though there were no incidents major enough to cause us to lose ships, there were those who died in the line of duty. And what were their names? As they continued their formal back and forth, a voluminous amount of information was flowing from the Klibnikek to the Goffnosh. That included the details concerning the fatal accident that occurred during training, as well as the names of the victims. Yet Leifir showed him she could list the 17 dead from memory. Through the Emperor and Training Fleet Commander-in-Chief's conversation, there was a sense those names were being elevated. The Ov were irreligious, but they were almost excessively respectful of the dead. We pay them our respects and gratitude. Dusanyu nodded, then added in a consoling tone, though it is a sad eventuality to be mourned, it is an eventuality. I shall endeavor not to let their deaths go in vain. Yes, do so. Let us make it a lesson from which to learn. Yes. If I could be allowed an audience, I would like to offer up a more detailed report. May I be permitted this honor? Of course, said Dusanyu. We too have things we must tell you. Leifir was taken aback. This meant she and Training Fleet 3 might be given a new mission. Rumors to that effect had sprung about many a time up until now, but they hadn't come to pass just yet. Nonetheless, she got the feeling now could finally be her big break. This was not the first time she had gained an audience with the Emperor in her capacity as Training Fleet Commander-in-Chief, but Dusanyu had never before told her that he had things to discuss with her before they met. Thank you very much. Leifir held in her confluence of emotions, instead simply expressing her gratitude the audience had been approved. Now then, we await you. The transmission ended. The audience is set for 11 hours 37 minutes from now, Jint reported without a moment's delay. Then I can get a nap in, murmured Lafier. Huh? Jint raised an eyebrow. Lafier got huffy. Am I inconveniencing you? No. As you wish, ma'am, he replied politely.